Thank you very much, Chair, and lovely to see each of you again. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us this morning as we restart our study and hopefully get it done this fall. I think we're all quite anxious to do so. I want to point out there's a lot of new members on our Fisheries and Oceans Committee, so I'm going to ask you to go back through each of you again and make sure that we define terms so that new folks to the space can understand. Uh, Mr. Halfyard just said TRL, MRV. When you've got a protocol, what does the protocol entail? A little bit about biochar and its value in agriculture and other things. The difference between voluntary and compliance market. Maybe you can divide those up, starting with Mr. Kelland. Just a few of those between you. Nobody taking on all of them, unless you disagree. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to start, Senator Deegan. Maybe I'll start at the bottom and I'll talk about voluntary and compliance markets because that's the one that I think is one of the most important things that we talk about in this context. A voluntary markets are quite large around the world. They represent about $2 billion a year in purchases. And so far on the voluntary market in carbon removal, about $10 billion worth of carbon removal has been purchased by companies around the world. So it's not a small, it's not something that seems insignificant because the word voluntary sort of feels, voluntary. Like, why would you do it? Carbon removals, voluntary simply means that the companies purchasing the carbon removals are purchasing them for their own reasons. There's no regulatory reason that they have to purchase a carbon removal. So they might be trying to meet their own internally set net zero targets. They might be trying to get into an industry, as I mentioned, about 2.6% of carbon removals have been delivered so far. There's a number of companies that are looking at that as a supply challenge as we head towards compliance markets, so what's called pre-compliance purchasing in that space. So a lot of airlines will buy carbon removal because they know that eventually they'll need to have carbon removals and they think they'll be more expensive in the future. But a voluntary market just exactly means that. It is completely based on people's own, corporate reasons for purchasing carbon removals. A compliance market, on the other hand, are far larger. Compliance markets represent over $400 billion in value around the world. Some of the largest ones that you might be aware of are the European emissions trading system, the California LCFS, and various different low carbon fuel standards and things like that. Carbon trading markets or carbon valuing markets, regulatory pressures to reduce carbon. Canada's own, carbon price, industrial carbon price, is an example of a compliance market. And really, I usually define a compliance market as any regulatory instrument that enforces an emissions reduction, because that forces companies to purchase either decarbonization technologies or high-quality carbon removals or other ways to decarbonize, and values it fundamentally inside that market. So it doesn't have to be a trading market necessarily. A regulation can actually create a compliance market behind the scenes. In the world, most compliance markets are what are called emissions trading or offset markets. These are markets that intend to look at a sectoral-based reduction in CO2 and allow a certain amount of emissions to happen and reward people in that sector or companies in that sector that are exceeding those targets to be able to trade their excess emissions. So that's really the difference at the end of the day.
And as we move to Dr. Gilbert, just to be clear, your 31 million you mentioned is voluntary market, and those are pre-purchased. That's pre-purchasing the production, basically, of carbon removal credits in effect, or is it like a purchase order?
It's a purchase order. We get paid on delivery with that, so that's not a pre-purchase at this point. The offtake that we received is once we deliver those credits, we get paid for those deliveries. But it is a voluntary market, yes.
Dr. Gilbert?
I'm happy to take on the question of MRV. MRV is measurement, reporting, and verification. Some people say it's measurement, reporting, and validation. But the idea is in the market when credits are being purchased, who's to say whether or not the CO2 has been captured and permanently stored, right? And we want there to be credibility and transparency along the way. So measurement reporting and verification is, can you measure and quantify the amount of CO2 that's been captured and permanently stored? Are you reporting it openly so that outsiders can see, anyone purchasing the credit can see, and can that be validated? Um, to create that transparency, there are independent organizations. Both Dr. Halfyard and I have mentioned Isometric. Isometric is an independent agency or an independent body that creates methodologies, which are like recipes for identifying what needs to be measured, what equations need to be used, what protocols, and then how to report in a way that everybody can agree on. So it's very important to establish these very clear measurement, reporting, and verification protocols. There's one additional step, and that is important for ours, and that is monitoring more broadly to figure out what happens after we release the bicarbonate into the ocean, to make sure that it remains stable and that we don't perceive any problems, ecological or otherwise. So there are other companies. Isometric is the leading company in that we've seen in MRV.